Good afternoon and welcome to Brave Embrace. I'm glad you're joining us on this Friday afternoon. We have had a fantastic couple of months talking about the criminal justice system, the civil justice system, and how it affects survivors. We've talked about cold cases and the elements of that. We've talked about complex trauma. We've had a survivor on that shared what it was like when her case finally found justice some 25 years later. Well, today I have with me a very important piece of the puzzle. I'd like to introduce my colleague and attorney, Rochelle Guiton, to our show today. Welcome.
Hi, Kim. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, I am thrilled that you're with us because there is so much going on in the press these days with these large cases. And since our firm is really setting the standard for good response and good service to survivors of crime, you are a big piece of that. And wanted you to share with our viewers. You come with an incredible background in serving and in civil justice along in the criminal justice system, being the felony chief prosecutor at Montgomery County. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Yes. And how many years were you there?
I was in Montgomery County at the DA's office for just shy of 10 years.
Wow. What a dedicated career of helping bring hope to those that have lost hope due to being a victim of crime or suffering a loss. But I know you also serve on a number of committees and task force also.
I did at the DA's office, and I think that is actually probably the biggest piece, Kim, that I love to share because you can't do this fight alone.
Mm.
It's very team oriented and task oriented, and even now, not being at the district attorney's office, I still maintain that desire and push for us to continue having a team like ours, right? To keep pushing and making sure that our survivors have the resources that they need.
It has made a huge impact in so many lives. And I love being on the front lines with you. You, along with our founders, really put together, like you said, this team of dedicated professionals to serve the clients that you are working with, those that have come through abuse at USC, collegiate abuse. We have New Orleans clergy survivors that we're working with, Boy Scout abuse clients as well, and a number of other dockets. How do you manage all of these important dockets with such, really troubling details when you get down to it? What is a day in the life like for you?
Sure. I mean, it really all boils down to a lot of calendaring. Everything has to tediously go on the calendar. And we have to balance and know what we can handle, just like everyone else and every other team. We've got to know what we can handle. And Kim, you know, as well as I know, even when I need those breaks, I call you and I say, hey, Kim, I've got to unload some of this. Can we talk about how this is, affecting me and my family and, all the things. And so just being able to juggle that and knowing what our limitations are and scheduling meticulously and and we get it done. Yeah.
Well, I know that I've heard from several of our clients recently as they're moving forward in their cases, and being able to reach their attorneys has been something that is so helpful to them. And I know you give yourself, you make yourself accessible to people to really help them understand what the process is and the maze of this system. I just want to thank you for that. As a survivor of crime, it's so nice to know that you are available to those that you're serving.
Well, I appreciate that, Kim, because I actually struggle with that piece of the work a lot mentally because I always think that I can do more or want to do more. And, at times, and you know how this process works is that if I'm needed in court or in a conference or in a meeting, those calls have to either get rescheduled or I get assistance from case managers and paralegals and things like that. And so, again, the team, right, is going to be a really important piece. And I always have to ask, our survivors for a little bit of grace, when we're juggling all the things. But I do have this like very intent desire to make sure that they understand the process
Mhm.
And and just making sure that they do know that I'm there for them when they need to talk and discuss their cases.
Yes, and I think they feel that. And knowing the history of the things that you have created, even safeguards when you were at the DA's office and dealing either with child crimes or sex crimes, crimes against persons, I know that connecting and showing that hope and the belief to those survivors was one of the key skills that you are bringing to us, and we're so grateful.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about the different dockets. I know that in the civil side, I'll be honest, it was a little bit of a learning curve to me, having most of my career in the criminal justice side, kind of, similar to you.
Right.
Right. And so understanding how each of these dockets and each of these caseloads, kind of are managed. And like we hear terms lately in the media, like, for example, in the Boy Scout case, that there are movements forward, but it's all centered around these bankruptcies and things like that. And I know that that is, you know, a lot of people don't really understand what that means and how their case moves forward. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Not at all. So, bankruptcy is interesting, right? And we're dealing with cases that are in Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
Hmm.
And the assumption is always that, that someone files for bankruptcy and they have no money, right?
Right.
And so then it's, everyone wants to understand, how is it that I can file a claim, potentially settle a case, and work through my lawsuit with a company that's bankrupt, right? And so one of the bigger deals, right, for a company like Boy Scouts of America or Purdue Pharma, when they're looking at large amounts of lawsuits, one of the things that they turn to be able to centralize all of those cases and be able to work them out in mass is going through a bankruptcy. And that's kind of what we're seeing on all of these dockets. And so that's how you end up with, what we have here at the Boy Scouts cases, where there are, over 90,000 claims
Mhm.
across the country, that have accumulated and are now looking for some resolution and
Mhm.
accountability.
So 90,000, and we know hundreds of thousands more, possibly, unfortunately, but 90,000 that have joined a firm of some point and have filed claim against, is it Boy Scouts of America at the national level, or have they filed claim against their state level Boy Scout charter, or is it a little bit of both?
So it's the National Organization of Boy Scouts of America. But you just have hit the nail on the head that it's an extremely, intricate organization, in that each of those different branches of Boy Scouts have state organizations, charters, and sponsors and local councils that are engaged and have all taken a part in, what we're seeing. And you're absolutely right. The number of claims that we have is over 90,000, but in my opinion, it's just kind of a scratch of the surface. Those are, unfortunately, in my opinion, the number of individuals that were ready to come forward.
Yes.
So yeah.
It takes a tremendous amount of bravery, I think, for anyone to come forward and disclose abuses, particularly sexual abuses. And I'm so grateful for your experience in there, because as we have case managers and liaisons to work with our survivors and paralegals, you've been able to instruct and train them on really trauma informed ways to deal with these survivors, so that this process can be as less re-victimizing as possible, right?
Yeah, I mean, and here's the truth, right? Unfortunately, I don't know that I can always make it as pain free as I'd like it to be. But I do train the staff, and Kim, that you've been a big part of that, in making sure that they understand trauma and response and the resources that we want to make available. And I do think that that's important. And you and I've had many in-depth conversations about this. And one of the pieces, that is the most difficult is that, litigation evolves different in every case, and sometimes very quickly. And and it's oftentimes, it's only so predictable, right? And so being able to talk to the survivors and help them to understand that, this is an unfortunate part, that I do have to call you and I have to ask more questions and get more details and things like that. But I think if we're open and honest with them about the process, most of our clients understand, and we just work through it together as a team.
Right. Yes, because imagine, so someone say decides to file a claim. They go through the process of contacting a firm and filling out some of the initial paperwork, understanding what it might look like. But each state is different, right? And so, and each jurisdiction is a little different with their statute of limitations and things. Is that, am I speaking correctly? I want to make sure I get the right attorney out there.
You're a
Yeah.
civil, yeah, you're a civil advocate in the, yeah, you're ready.
Well, but I sometimes even hesitate because I feel like when we're serving these clients in different states and so forth, just finding resources for them and helping them understand what the process will be like is new and individual on each case. And that's one of the things that we try to share in supporting your work as the attorney, is that we're there to listen and help them unpack it as the memories surface. Because
Right.
right,
Right.
sometimes
But
they,
then you're having the added, right, difficulty of, throwing in deadlines and things like that. Or we might unpack as much information as we can. And then down the line, there's a new request that comes, or a claim form, or a plaintiff fact sheet, and they ask different questions. And then you have to go back and call that survivor. And so, sometimes they're unfortunately having to relive those circumstances or experiences more than they ever would like. And I hope that they know it's more than I would ever want to put them through.
mm, yes, I believe that they do. And but one of the things I love about the team that you've created with us is that we're able to help them move through some of the new memories or some of the hidden memories. And I feel like maybe that opens up the wounds a little bit to the light. And maybe while it seems, hurtful and traumatizing at the moment, what are your thoughts on that helping them long term as far as being able to put words to it?
So I actually think that's a great therapy. And being able to unpack all that pain and talk about it and process, the feelings that they're having of guilt or shame and embarrassment, and being able to talk about it with a real person who understands what they've gone through, and being able to be told, right, and truly listen to the fact that they're entitled to the way that they feel and the way that they've responded. I think I think that's therapy, and it's good closure. No matter what the resolution of our case is, that it's helped them process, this. And I think you said it best, that it's bringing it to the light, right? And so I think that's great therapy.
I hope, and I know you've called it and mentioned it as being their truths and letting them speak their truths, finding those over time. And I love that we have an opportunity to really talk about this so that survivors can understand that it is really a process, a journey of healing that maybe lasts a lifetime, right?
Yeah, and you're right. I typically do say they're standing and talking and walking their truth,
Love that.
because what happened is their experience and their perpetrators have pushed them in a sense that they are feeling alone
Mm,
and in the dark, and feeling like they have to hide what happens. And when they're able to stand in that truth and, profess what's happened, it really is allowing them to feel free, in their truth, in what is happened to them. And the perpetrators are the ones that should be, hiding in fear and shame and guilt.
yes. Yes. Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to switch gears just a bit. With your long history of just really selfless dedication to dealing in these tough situations, I'm sure that there are several, maybe you can talk about one or two cases that have just really stuck with you, where you've been able to bond with the family or watch the process. I know you had recent last year, I think, a nice judgment on a case that you were able to form a really good bond with that sexual assault abuse survivor. And So what is it like when you really dig in and kind of build that bond with them?
I mean, every case has been different for me, and I think the best experience for me is being able to see how each different survivor processes the case. I learn from that. And I've been in you're right that I've worked so many of these cases. I've been in positions where I've cried with them and I've laughed with them. And just being able to have those victories, even, in some circumstance where it's very a minor victory or a big victory, no matter what it is, that they're able to get that closure. And so even at the beginning of this year, I was able to settle a case in a state that was had an open statute, and it was great because the abuse had happened, more than 30 years ago. And, thankfully, this survivor had remembered, you know, a lot of details that we were able to corroborate, which is really important in a lot of the work that we do. And we were able to get her some closure. And that was really important. Whether you try a case or you settle a case, that perpetrator or that organization, that institution is taking responsibility, finally for what they did. Even at the district attorney's office, even having worked cases where I've been able to get life verdicts with strong evidence, the ones that I remember the most are the ones that were harder to prove, where, survivors maybe felt like they didn't have any hope of justice. And, those 8-year sentences, 4-year sentences where they were having to take, responsibility for what they did because we were able to find that like key piece of evidence, or, have that survivor who was afraid to come forward finally be able to use their voice. I just, I remember it all. I carry it with me, and I hope that experience will shape what I do for the next survivor to be able to help them.
Yes, it brings so much hope to the equation when you can bond and share with them like you have, that you are in this for the long haul, that you are willing to work hard to uncover those hidden pieces of evidence and put that puzzle together. I like the way you described it as, so justice looks different for everybody. It could be a life sentence, or it can be a year or 30 days in local jail. But if there's an accountability on a perpetrator's part, whether it's an academic institution or other, types of large entities, that accountability maybe is a key that makes someone feel that justice has been served. Would you say?
I do. I think that's it, and sometimes, right, people aren't going to admit what they did. In most cases like this, people aren't going to admit it, right? And so you put in the work to show a judge or show a jury or even their attorney. Sometimes you show their defense attorney, like, this is what you're up against. And you put in the work, and the survivors are walking with me to do that. Right. And so I think that the big piece is that, that accountability for sure, and being able to be heard.
Being heard. That's just what I was thinking to say as well. Being heard. I remember being on the stand as a witness in my own case of being a victim of crime, and the feeling I had of connection with that particular prosecutor. And again, it could be the same with a civil attorney, but just knowing that you're fighting for me and that you're a voice for me is, I call that an essential worker. There are so many professions being praised right now, and I'm so glad, as they deserve. But I think about our system, and I think about those fighters, those warriors on the front lines, like yourself, that, you wake up in the morning thinking about these cases. I'm sure you go to bed thinking about them, and, and the impact that has on people's lives.
I do it, but Kim, it's funny that I think we think the same of each other, because I think being, in the position that you've been in and sitting on the stand, and having to speak that truth, it makes you the warrior. And so I've always said, especially in depositions and in trial, people that testify, try, right, to take the burden and the nerves out of testifying by saying, you just tell the truth. You just tell the truth, right? But it's like the hardest, piece of the case is, looking at that person and telling and pointing and saying he did this or she did this. And so I think that in the whole process and all the things that we do, I think the survivors or the warriors.
I love that. And those survivors listening or those that will watch, in the coming days and months, I want you to hear that, we think you're a warrior. And whether this occurred yesterday or 30 years ago, it's still important. And it's as important to us, right, to fight that and to be that voice. So back to Boy Scouts for a minute, if I can use this example again, because I still want to help people understand a little bit about that civil litigation process. But so when this entity, for example, filed for bankruptcy, did that open up dollars then that are available for judgments that come from like insurance policies? Or what exactly does that mean? If they go in bankruptcy and say they have, we think that means they have no money, then how does the accountability happen?
Keep in mind the bankruptcy litigation process is a little bit different from your general civil litigation.
Okay. Yes.
And I wouldn't say that it necessarily opens doors, just in the sense that it centralizes where all those claims are going to go. Okay. And when you have a bankruptcy, instead of filing a complaint, we would have the survivors fill out a proof of claim form. And so each of those 90,000 plus survivors, filed a proof of claim form. And then what happens in the case is that they're going to consider, and everyone, all these attorneys and the committees and the coalitions and all of these people that are, fighting for the survivors and those that are fighting for Boy Scouts of America are going to consider all of the different organizations, insurance companies, charters, sponsoring organizations, and things like that are going to consider all of what's available and start making decisions and negotiations and mediation and things like that to start seeing, what is the best route? What can we do to help these survivors to hold people accountable? But then the benefit that the debtor, Boy Scouts of America, gets in a bankruptcy, if they want their organization to continue, then the fight is also going to be to, try to make sure that this organization can survive the bankruptcy. And so there's a lot of different balancing, of ideals and, I guess points of fact that, people are making sure that all of those things can happen at once.
I see. Wow. So when we are reaching out and connecting again with our survivors that we're representing, really it's our goal to be enhancing their, factual information by additional details and memories and things like that, so that we can provide that to show that, yes, they did attend at this event or this council and charter. And, I can imagine that is muddy waters to walk through, because I know that, one weekend I was helping my dear friend and staying with her boys, and they had a scout event that I took them to, and it had to do with the little derby cars, that they raced. And but when I look back on that, I think there were so many people and adults and things that it's hard, I think, for children maybe to have known who was in charge or who was supposed to be. So yeah, the added difficulty for these survivors, I think, is identifying just exactly what happened when, by whom, and so forth. And yeah, so that is a difficult piece.
It is. And that's another rough piece of our job, right? Because the bar and the expectation is up here. And then people forget that when this happened in a lot of our cases, it was 30, 20, sometimes 40 years ago. And they were so young. I mean, kids aren't, back then, or even at that age now, are not running around with iPhones and marking their calendars of what's happened and where they've been. I can hardly remember what I ate for lunch last week. And we have this expectation, for them to give us every little minute detail. And
Mhm.
so, what I think is important, and I know that you all are on the front lines for our office doing this, is making sure that they know that we have a respect for whatever information that they're able to give us,
Mhm.
and then doing our part to help them. So
Mhm.
if they have a photograph of themselves in their scout uniform and we can look at badges and things like that, or if they can remember the school where their meetings were held, and then we can do our background research and figure out what's local council that particular school was a part of. We have some resources that we can use to kind of sort through some of those necessary details, but
Mhm.
then still, have that understanding that the facts are what the facts are.
Yes.
And we can't blame anybody for one, what they naturally forget over time. And
Mhm.
two, which is what I think the biggest piece of this is, forgetting things that they've probably tried their entire life to forget.
Yes.
And so we're now saying, let's bring all of this stuff to the surface and tell me what you can remember that happened 20 years ago. I mean, quite frankly, I think that it's unfair, but
Mhm.
unfortunately, it's the nature of the beast. And
Mhm.
so we are, it's our job to work with them as best that we can
Mhm.
and do our jobs and figure out how we can gather as much information, and then letting them know that they're not the only ones out there, that there are thousands of others, that have the same, issues with their memory recall, that have pushed this down and don't want to remember, so it's
Yes.
a safe space.
Safe space. I really appreciate the way that you said how we respect what they're able to remember and what they're not. I think that's a beautiful way to partner with them to help them understand too that it's natural and normal for them to have some of those memories not available, or like you said, they've tried their entire life to push these down, and the shame that is involved with it often, and just feeling responsible perhaps. I'm finding that as I'm delving in with some of our survivors, a lot of the issues are raising around the way life played out after that, and some of the dysfunction that occurred due to the distress mentally that was put upon them by these abuses, and unpacking that as well. And it's like there's a realization now, additionally, not only understanding the abuses that happened, but then how it affected their life and their ability to move on into life. And it's really difficult and for them to share, and it's difficult to carry as well. My heart is breaking, and when I talk to them, and they just feel as if, wow, is there going to be some resolution for this?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely would want them to know that we're working really hard and want obviously the best resolution that we can possibly get. You know, you're right that this happens, right? And this thing happens. And when it happens, they not always right then in the moment know this is wrong or this is bad. It may feel uncomfortable or weird, or, you're like, maybe this wasn't right, but, you still trusted that person. And
Mhm.
then over time, as they get older and wiser and have other experiences, they start, the realization, right, of what's happened. And I think, it affects every facet of their lives, their ability to maintain relationships
Yes.
and to trust people. And so it brings turmoil to relationships with their spouses and their children and their schoolwork. And it brings up anxieties and depression and things like that. And, one of the things that I always have to keep as a really reality, even for myself, right? Because I can be an aggressive attorney and, always want, these top settlements. And as a prosecutor, wanted convictions for those persons. And I have to keep a reality for me in knowing that I can't ever promise that I can get what they deserve. those experiences, it's I can't ever get a survivor what they truly deserve, but they deserve that I fight for them, and they deserve to stand up for themselves. And so that's the closure that I hope that any case, a criminal case or a civil case, will bring, because that I think that's the best that we all can do, right? And so
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Allowing them to know that you're fighting for them in this way, and I think that is a way to understand closure differently. That yes, we might have this expectation, but knowing that you're fighting as hard as you can to get to land where we do, and that was an important part of the process for you. I really appreciate that. Now, help me understand how this situation is different maybe than what you're dealing with New Orleans Archdiocese and the clergy there. If you don't mind, just kind of
no,
talking
I mean, I think that they're very similar.
about
All of it's the same, it's a similar response. There are individuals that have filed suit, and this stuff, it comes up in the media, and more people, thankfully, are willing to come forward and speak their truth. And so, yeah, I mean, they're similar occurrences. And so then they fill out their proof of claim form, and we work through the same or similar, process. But
process.
yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there are, archdioceses and church organizations that where abuse is occurring.
Mhm, mhm. So we're fighting for those survivors as well, hoping to give them a voice and to move that into a triumph, maybe rather than a tragedy that has taken hold of their life for so long. So I know that you are passionate about your work, and it shows in the way that you deal not only with your team and with your staff, but also with your colleagues, but then with survivors and their families. Where do you get that zest? Where does that drive come from?
I don't, that's a good question. I have no idea. I I actually thought I was a lifetime prosecutor,
Mhm.
but I do know, from working at the district attorney's office, that I am victim and survivor oriented. And so it never mattered to me who I was fighting, but that I had a good cause. And that's, I like
Mm.
being on the side of right,
I love that.
I
Yes.
don't know if I could say that any better, but it just is, I like wearing the white hat,
Mhm.
and I like plaintiff's work. And this is, I've thought that this was a God thing for me, that there aren't many attorneys or any, persons in just this work that are able to do it as long as I have and still smile about it, and sometimes it's kind of a weird thing, right? To love this work, but I think that the overall benefit, for everybody to be able to say that I do this work, I'm honored and I'm proud of the work that I do. So, I'm able to sleep at night knowing that I get to wake up every morning and do the right thing.
Do the right thing. What a beautiful way to say it. And I know our survivors feel it from our firm. I mean, we have such a strength in our attorneys that they are victim centered and they want to be on the right side of right for sure. Those scales of justice, though, are so unbalanced. We saw recently, and I've talked about it on a few shows because I'll be honest, it took me back. It really triggered something in me that was so difficult. But with the release of a celebrity recently that had been, found guilty by a jury of a sexual assault and had many other allegations. And there was, a situation that technicality some would call. But when you see those happen, and he was released, and what does it feel like from your perspective as a stakeholder, as a professional in the field who fights for right, to see that the system kind of, I don't want to say fail, but have a situation that ends like this?
I mean, but sometimes it hurts.
Mhm.
It hurts. And unfortunately, sometimes the system is broken. Um, and it goes back to what I said before, is that I can never get anyone what they truly deserve in a circumstance and what we're dealing with. If we start looking at, I mean, and I know we have over several thousand Boy Scout cases,
Mhm.
and I've read them all. I know them all, and I feel like I know what they've experienced.
Mhm.
And knowing, having read all that and knowing no one can pay for what this has cost them. So he was released, and as a prosecutor, right? So if I go back to my mindset as a prosecutor, um, that's like, it's unfortunate for something like that to happen, but I've always had to have it in my mind and in my heart that the right thing always happens, that there's all things work together for the good, and being able to trust that even though the system fails us, because it's true, the system fails us on many levels, not just in sexual abuse, but in all kinds of other facets that we see in the media, and the system fails us. And just making sure that you and I and others do our part so that these things don't happen more often than not, is unfortunately sometimes the best thing that we can do. And if we look at all our failures, I mean, we won't be able to get up in the morning to do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And so that's kind of my mindset, like just trying to refresh every day and wake up and go, okay, we've got this, on to the next thing. And what can we do to help the next person, the next survivor? And, you know, um,
I think that sentiment really speaks to survivors as well, of being able to, wake up each day, hit that refresh button. I love that example, and really move, forward each day in hope. You talked about sometimes when those uh, what seemed like a failure of a system, it opens up a gap that we see maybe, and then someone, like you said, can come in and close that gap, working all things together for good, seeing that that maybe was something that was purposeful down the line, and then rally around that, make the changes, move forward. But unless they're exposed, we don't see them, right?
right. And then think of all the survivors that weren't related to that particular case with that, you know, gap, right? That came forward because of the light that it shed, right? And so it, not to make light at all of any of that happens, or the failures and the gaps in the system, but I think that when you're in the fight, you're in it, and you've got to keep looking forward. Okay, what can I do to fix this?
Yes.
I hope that those prosecutors there, and that they're looking to see how can we make sure this doesn't happen again, and
Yes.
that's the hope.
That is the
And
hope.
so, yeah, I mean, we're human, and we do the best that we can with what we've got. And same for survivors, right? That doing the best in their circumstance, their experience,
Mhm.
and forging forward.
Forging forward. Yeah, not feeling pulled back by every time something happens that triggers that feeling of something not being right. And I have to walk this out daily as well as a survivor, because some things are just hard, and you hear them, and or that a court date is coming up, or there's a parole, or there's a hearing, or there's a story in the news. Yes, things that can definitely take us down. But finding that hope again, and I have found moving in that hope, seeing ways to either close gaps, or help laws get founded, or whatever, moves into healing, or was for me anyway. It helped me
Yeah.
move into healing.
And
So
absolutely, and give yourself some grace, right? So if that court date is coming up and you need some downtime to mentally prepare before or after, give yourself that grace. Like, we all deserve that, the self care and self awareness, And so, this is not at all to belittle those moments, right? Because it takes you down. I mean, it revives feelings and thoughts and, things that you don't ever want to relive. And so being self-aware and knowing I've got to have this downtime, and you give yourself some grace and you revive yourself and refresh and all that, and then you get back to it.
Right. So I think it's endearing as well. And I hope those listening feel it. But even knowing that they're not in that fight alone, I mean, here you are giving us your time to share how important these cases are to you personally. And knowing that you're carrying that torch with us all, with survivors as they lay their head down at night, that they have a warrior and a champion. For me, that gives me additional hope and makes me feel not alone. You talked about self-care and self-awareness, which was a light bulb moment for me. I love self-care, but adding the piece of being aware about what you need and when you need it, I think that it was like, boom, that hit me big, the self-awareness piece. So how do you practice that in your own life? You mentioned calling and reaching out to friends and colleagues. What else do you do?
Yeah, I mean, the awareness piece is big. I can remember, years ago when I would schedule multiple, survivor meetings in a day, and I had to realize, even for me, that was hard. So I had to learn how to work my calendar and how to make sure, because it's not fair if I have two meetings and I'm burning out, and then I have a third meeting, and it's not fair to that person that I'm meeting with. And so for attorneys, in general, and anyone that's kind of in this work, like making sure that you have the awareness of what you're capable of and what your limitations are, and go, you know what, I think maybe I should move this one to tomorrow, and managing. That's why I think managing the calendar is so important, and knowing what your balance is, because we do carry it. When I say that I know my cases, I read them and I carry them with me, and those are, I remember the experiences that I'm working on, right? And so I do think the self-awareness is key. And my family, understands the work that I do, and so they allow me to have the self-care time that I need. If I need a break for a couple hours or whatever, that I can do that. And so it's important to have the family support to balance all of that out, you know.
Self-awareness as a big piece of self-care. That's a takeaway for me today, and really thinking about what I do need, giving yourself permission, and you mentioned it, giving yourself grace when things do kind of take over your psyche, or when I feel paralyzed sometimes. That's kind of where it's landed for me in the journey of being a survivor. There are times when it would make me cry, or I get upset or withdrawn, and now sometimes it makes me feel paralyzed. But I have, like you said, learned to just give myself a little grace and say, well, that makes sense. That was a terrible piece of news you just listened to, or a really difficult experience that you read about. And so, yeah,
Yeah, or just recognizing that you need a good laugh, or a
yeah,
good cry,
yes,
or I
right.
finish a long day at work, and sometimes I go to my family and I say I need a good laugh, and my daughter comes out with her knock knock jokes, or I mean, this I think this happened maybe 2 days ago or so. I mean, and I say, hey, I need a good laugh. And so just being able to live in the moment, I think too, is
Mhm.
important for that, self-care piece.
Boy, I'm going to remember to call you now and say, can your daughter give me some knock knock
Yeah,
jokes?
yeah,
I love that.
she's ready.
Is she? Yeah. And YouTube, I know I talked to an advocate once who mentioned that her little self-care thing was, and she even said, okay, this is embarrassing, but watching silly cat videos, whatever you need to do to just lighten the load, give yourself perspective, and kind of reframe. And I feel like we're hitting this place again as a society with, I know I'm in the Midwest and you're in Texas, but I know that with numbers increasing of COVID, in my mind, in my heart, it feels like we're going back to that place where everything kind of stopped. And I feel some fear about it. I feel just what's going to happen. How do we get through this again? So when you have world stress and maybe life stress and then victimization stress, do you have any tips on kind of how to not let that take you all the way down?
Sure. I mean, we're doing a part of it right now, right? So we're having to social distance and we're on Zoom. And like I think one of the biggest things that I worried about, I mean, and I think even on the Talk to Me Tuesday show had discussed was the isolation of COVID and how worried about survivors. And this was both on a sexual abuse stance and a domestic violence stance, that I worried about them being in isolation with abusers or just amongst themselves, because it could be, kind of a hole, right, that you're just digging deeper and left with your own thoughts. And so I think relationships is key, and reaching out to people, self-awareness, right? And knowing when you need that human contact.
Mhm.
And, sometimes like just going out and sitting on the porch or the driveway and like getting some sunlight, is big. But I do, Kim, I kind of feel that same thing coming too, right? The fear of being back, stuck in our homes and isolated. And it's a scary thing. But I think being aware of, where we are and not being consumed by fear, because anybody that's survived abuse can survive COVID. I mean, like you've experienced this and you're a survivor and you're a fighter. And so just knowing, hey, I think especially, right, if they're one of our clients, they can call and speak to anybody on our staff and have a listening ear and have that human contact. And so I think that will be vital, right now when those numbers are climbing.
I agree. And it makes me think as well for you on the litigation side of just how the system kind of stopped before, right? Like, court hearings weren't being held and they have pivoted, I think, and now are doing a lot through Zoom and other mechanisms to keep the wheels of justice moving. But I know, I'm sure that changes the way that your day looks each day when you have to think about the system being closed and how
Oh,
each.
sure, sure. And I hope that now that it's gotten a bit better, now we're more equipped and we're used to, being able to hop on a Zoom and discuss a case or go
Yeah.
on Zoom and attend court and things like that, or phone conferences and things like that. And so I think that we've gotten better at it. But of course, there are going to be those circumstances where live court is going to be best. And it depending on what area we're in, how that, what we should do and what that response should be.
How that, yes, plays out. Um, well, I know you manage a lot of really strong dockets. You have some human trafficking cases. We have abuses in Uber and Lyft cases that we're working with. You mentioned a few others with the clergy and the Boy Scouts of America. Um, you know, any thoughts to leave our viewers with just about kind of the way this is landing on people? I mean, I know you mentioned earlier, and it stuck with me, but to look at it as an inspired view, whether people are now having the strength to come forward and finding their voice, it feels like, wow, is all of this new abuse is just happening? But I think you reframed it a little bit. People are feeling strong and feeling safe enough to talk about things.
I hope so. I mean, and I think that there's power in speaking truth.
Mhm.
And I hope that the people that have come forward, on all these dockets, whether, I'm involved in those cases or not, that they feel empowered just by coming forward,
Mhm.
that it means everything, that you're willing to, stand on the line and speak truth.
Mhm.
And if nothing else, be encouraged that you've got fighters that are standing on the line with you and like arm in arm. And
Yeah.
so I hope that the fear that or shame that was always kind of conducive to coming forward and, with civil litigation or just, coming forward in any case or claim, that that is kind of dying. I hope that, we're just kind of eradicate the fear and shame that comes with it.
Fear and shame. I love to think of eradicating the fear and shame. It'll be generations before I think we're able to stop some of the abuses and people hurting people, but eradicating the fear and the shame of stepping into their truth, speaking that and finding their voice and being empowered. That is, again, another takeaway from you today that I'm really feeling that we are hoping to serve people in a way they can feel empowered.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Empowering them wherever they are with whatever their circumstances or experiences.
Yes. Well, I have loved our time together. I just, COVID has kept us distant physically, but I know we've been able to really get to know each other and share through some of these situations. And the reason we do this show is to, highlight stories of overcoming, talk about people being brave, finding their brave, seeking their brave. And you inspire brave in people, Rochelle. And I just want to thank you for that.
Thank
Really.
you, Kim. Thanks for having me. And I don't know how much you talk about the work that you do, but you've been such a vital part at our firm, ensuring that, when we do have those distressed clients and survivors, that they have the resources that they need. And I mean, even in those scary situations sometimes, right, that you are, I mean, hunting and looking for those resources that they need so badly. And it's so appreciated. And I know that they feel, because you get, right, the work that I do and the things that I want our clients to understand about what we do and what we represent. And you are a great extension of that. And I just appreciate your work so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you. You have a great team around us. We have many more, and we'll just bring them all on one day and we'll
I
have a big
know, right?
Zoom party to celebrate. Well, again, thank you so much. We do this to bring light to the darkness. We highlight these stories that were found in difficult moments, and we walk that out with you. We want to bring those tragedies and turn them to some triumphs, whatever that looks like for you individually, finding yourself empowered. So again, thank you, Rochelle. We'll close for today. Everybody have a great weekend, and until next time, be brave.